We are so used to being conditioned to a certain temperature in a room, to having a car automatic opener or Uber comes so we don't have to walk down the road. And I bring up that movie Wall-E from the early 2000s.
So if in that example where a man and woman come to you, you wouldn't recommend the woman to fast in the same way that you'd recommend a man to fast. Is there any differences that you'd recommend in training if their goal was to lose weight?
Yep, absolutely. So when we're looking at regardless of age for women, because we see that women don't age in a linear fashion like men. So we had definitive points. We have puberty, we have our reproductive years, we might have pregnancy in there, we have perimenopause, we have postmenopause. Each one of those is a different hormone profile that it can affect the way we train. For men, you just kind of go, whoo, and we start to see a decline of testosterone when we get into our late 50s. So when we're talking about women and training, if someone is coming in and they're in their mid 30s and they're like, I want to lose weight, okay, resistance training. If someone comes in and they're in their mid 40s and perimenopause, resistance training. Doesn't matter. Resistance training is key for mobilizing abdominal fat and for creating more lean mass, and also increasing the amount of crosstalk between their skeletal muscle and our stored fat through little things called myokines, which are hormone signals that are released during exercise and released from the skeletal muscle. So if we say, okay, let's do resistance training to really recomp the body. But the problem is we've become a lazy society and people think exercise is too hard. As an exercise physiologist, it breaks my heart to see people who are struggling to walk down the street because we are so used to being conditioned to a certain temperature in a room, to having a car automatic opener or Uber comes so we don't have to walk down the road. And I bring up that movie Wall-E from the early 2000s with the little robot who's like wandering around society, and you see all these people on these floating beds watching a screen, and one of the guys gets kicked off by Wall-E, accidentally falls down, he can't get up. And he's looking around going, well, why can't I get up? What's going on? I'm like, that's today's society where people are not able to actually pull their own body weight around for a significant amount of time because it feels too difficult. So I'm not going to schedule a high intensity workout that day. I'm going to sleep in, maybe do some mobility, recover, and really know that I'm not going to nail it that day. So I'm not going to go push myself because I don't want to beat myself up mentally, because women do this. They're like, I suck. I don't know why. But it comes down to that physiological variability. And for a woman to track her own cycle, understand her own nuances. If you're really onto it and you know when you ovulate, then you can take those molecular structures into play where you can hit your PR and you can really push it in the low hormone phase. After ovulation, you're going to switch it to more endurance, maybe not so high intensity, but more tempo type work. And then about the 4 or 5 days before your period starts, where your immune system's more compromised, you just kind of want to dial it down and use it as deload. So we can take the strength and conditioning ideas of building up macro, micro cycles and deload across the menstrual cycle.
Did science just look at women as a different version of men? Did they just look at women as like a
smaller version of men?
Is that how they looked?
Yeah, for the most part. Because a lot of the stuff when I was going through school and even now textbooks. So I was standing in the metro in DC a few months ago, and there was a young girl who has just gotten into exercise physiology, and I overheard her conversation, and she was talking about some of the experiments that they were doing, but she never talked about like we have to make we're doing women specific, we're doing men specific. And I asked her, I was like, has anyone talked to you about how women's bodies are different than men's from angles and muscle morphology? And she's like, no, what are you talking about? I was like, this is the second year in XPhys now. And if you look at the textbooks, it's still a representation of men in the textbook with regards to images. You have him or they, you never have her. They might have a very small section in there about the female athlete, but usually it's about the female athlete. And anemia or relative energy deficiency in sport. It's never about how we can empower women to use their bodies and their physiology to their advantage. And it's what, almost 2025 now.
How should I be thinking about exercise as I'm going through my menopause journey?
So we look, as I said earlier, exercise is a really good stress for adaptive change. So when we start getting into all these ratio shifts of estrogen and progesterone, we can't rely on our hormones to create those adaptive changes. And so what I mean by that is like estrogen is responsible for muscle protein synthesis and strength and power for women. Progesterone and estrogen are responsible for bone growth, bone density. We can't rely on our hormones for that anymore. We have to look for an external stress. So this is where exercise comes in. So we're looking specifically at how to invoke a stress to change our insulin sensitivity. In other words, improve our blood glucose control. We need to do proper high intensity work. So that's sprint interval or it's true high intensity work to create a stress that's high enough to have the brain say, hey, this is a really, really, really strong stress. I need to invoke changes within the skeletal muscle to be able to store more glucose. I also need to invoke more changes in the mitochondria so that it can use and store more free fatty acids. And I'm going to have more myokine released from the skeletal muscle to tell the liver, don't esterify those fatty acids. I want to use them at rest so we don't get visceral fat gain.